thank you all for being here. It's great that so many of you could make it at such short notice. And thank you to the speakers for accepting my invitation on behalf of BRAC and for connecting from this diversity of time zones. What is BRAC? BRAC stands for Birkbeck Research in Aesthetics of Kinship and Community. And it's a research centre based at Birkbeck, University of London, which was established 11 years ago. The main aim of the centre is to analyse, promote and commission artistic works of representation of the human bond in all its configurations across cultures and history. And today's event, this roundtable discussion, is intended to do just that, i.e. to reflect on ways in which the aesthetic representation of the idea of community may have shifted or come to be reinterpreted during the period of lockdown that much of the world has just experienced and is still experiencing in some parts. So we will begin with the screening of a short film about 12 minutes long in French with English subtitles entitled Le Noir de l'Eclipse, The Darkness of the Eclipse, made during the lockdown by Eniko Fekete. Eniko Fekete is the pseudonym of a team of two French anthropologists, Fabienne and Alexandre, and I am delighted to say that Fabienne is with us today and will be contributing to the event in the margin, that is to say in the chat section in French, and we will do our best to translate her comments in real time. So before I start, I would like to present each of the participants, beginning with Fabienne herself. So what I want to say, though, is that everybody is welcome to join into the conversation at any given time. So don't be afraid to click on your microphone and say whatever comes to your mind. So Fabienne Martin is an anthropologist, a research fellow at the French National Centre for Scientific Research, and a member of the Laboratory for Social Anthropology in Toulouse, France. She has conducted fieldwork in India for 20 years and has more recently worked in Japan. Her research focuses on community-making processes and the emergence of new forms of existence. Irving, can you speak so that you come to the screen for people?
Hello.
So who you are? Yeah. So Irving is President's Assistant Professor of Literature at the National University of Singapore. He is the author of the prize-winning book, The Reject, Community, Politics and Religion After the Subject, published in 2014. His second monograph, L'existence prépositionnelle, was published by Galilée in 2019. The Deconstruction of Sex, a work in collaboration with Jean-Luc Nancy, is forthcoming. His current research interests are in failure in French thought, affect theory, and contemporary French and Anglo-American literature. Ian James, are you here, Ian?
Hello,
Hi.
I'm here.
He is a reader in modern French literature and thought at the University of Cambridge. His research focuses on 20th century and contemporary French literature and philosophy. His most recent book explores the relationship between philosophy and science, as articulated in the works of four contemporary French thinkers or philosophers, Jean-Luc Nancy, François Laruelle, Catherine Malabou, and Bernard Stiegler. Elodie Lowe, are you here? Elodie?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi. Elodie Lowe is a senior lecturer in French at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. Her research focuses on 20th and 20th century French literature, especially poetry, and its relations to philosophy and politics. She is co-director of the Center for Poetic Innovation and has a particular interest in creative writing in plurilingual contexts. Her last monograph, Figure de l'intrusion, published in 2019, focuses on the notion of intrusion, drawing from Jean-Luc Nancy's take on the body and aesthetics in relation to films by Claire Denis, Nicolas Klotz, and Rabah Amor-Zaimesh. Corey Stockwell. Corey.
Hi.
Hi, Corey. Is assistant professor at Bilkent University, Ankara, Turkey. He is a comparatist whose main interest is the legacy of Hermeticism in modern literature and philosophy. He has published on the theme of impoverishment in the works of writers such as Kafka, Blanchot, Lispector, and Bolaño, and thinkers such as Zizek, Agamben, and Deleuze. He is currently working on a book about Sebald and Nancy. As you will see, as you will have noticed, there is a common theme, a common thread in everybody, all the speakers today, and that's the interest in Jean-Luc Nancy. I am Nathalie Vouon, co-founder and director of BRAC since 2009. I am a lecturer in 20th and 21st century French literature, especially poetry, at Birkbeck, University of London. So let's start by watching the short film made during the lockdown in April 2020 and entitled Le Noir de l'Eclipse, The Darkness of the Eclipse. After that, then we'll have the discussion and there will be time for questions.
I'm really interested in that that frame where, you know, that's the image of the eclipse superimposed on that image of you know, in the background as people applauding, you know, the efforts of the medical service. I'm just wondering which area is that?
Okay, I've got to say, Fabienne will reply in the chat, and but I think that it said it was in Paris.
Ah. Donc arrondissement.
So sorry, just 1 minute. I have a small problem. I'm coming.
I think it was in Paris, but pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Corey, I can't hear you. Are you trying to say something?
You don't have your microphone on.
Yeah, no, I had my microphone off. I also have a couple of questions, but I'll wait until Fabienne has dealt with yours.
Sorry.
I think that these periods of clapping happen pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
Here in Britain, we did it as well, but it was on Thursdays only, whereas in France it was every day, every 8 p.m.
Right. But I'm just wondering, it's, you know, which neighborhood was, you know, was it, you know, in that picture kind of thing. Well, perhaps I should maybe I go on with my question first.
Yeah.
Should I?
Okay. The anthropological plan, the plan of reality from which me and Alexandre deploy our proposal, is people at windows who applaud. To analyze this situation, to put it back in the perspective of the event, we have chosen the eclipse, a phenomenon that is both known by physical science and at the same time unknown. In the dark, we don't know what happens, or if we know something, it is highly codified, captured by rituals, etc. So what is at stake with the metaphor of the eclipse? It is to put together the known and unknown parts of the event. And at the same time, it is about questioning the spectacle, because the eclipse is also a show. The image of the eclipse that we have superimposed on the people applauding comes from a video shot with a smartphone by Americans gathered together to watch an eclipse in deck chairs with popcorn. Well, that's a very substantial answer. Thank you very much, Fabienne.
Right.
Did I answer your question?
Well, yeah, yes and no. Well, because I suppose I was interested in, the very slight difference between an eclipse and what is being eclipsed. And what I realized, I mean, what I saw in the image was, the image of a solar eclipse. So, what's being eclipsed there in that image is the sun, and for me, the sun could stand for, something like it's a body of light, and if you go back into history, into genealogy and all that kind of things, then it seems to suggest some kind of sovereign body, the kind of glorious being, kind of thing. But I'm not so sure if we want to talk about the eclipse, in the situation, that should be the kind of sovereign body that we are talking about. And I was thinking about, what about the neighborhoods in Paris, in Sunset, in Saint-Denis, which is, in recent, just a few days ago, was a kind of like hotbed, for the question of social justice and things like that. So we possibly already have the eclipse, whether with the event of the pandemic or not. And I was just wondering whether these are, this is where the voices that we should be hearing, if you really want to think about what has been scattered, what has been already scattered, and what has already been eclipsed. And I was just wondering about that. So that was,
yeah. I think that I mean, your interpretation is very similar to mine. I don't know what other people think, but yes, the idea that there is the people, there are two communities. There's a community of people who thrive in the light and recreate this light during the sorry, I don't know if my video is working or not, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to be working. These people thrive in the light, and they reproduce this light by coming, probably artificial lights, the lights of the media, the what is it called, the cameras, the lights of the cameras, and then there's the whole community of people who are completely ignored. And yeah, Elodie.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Natalie.
Oh, right, okay.
But
completely ignored.
I'll pick up later.
People who I may, that's my interpretation anyway, but people who have a sort of deeper, maybe they're scattered, but the darkness gives me the impression that there's a depth to their beings, as opposed to the ones to the community of people who are in the light of the projectors. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. Sorry, good.
Sorry, thank you, Irving, for your initial question, and Natalie for picking that up. When you asked about whether what being eclipsed potentially was the sun, and therefore a representation or a gesture in the direction of a sovereign body, I was thinking, one, the first thing that came to my mind was, in that case, we're not able to look at it directly. The solar eclipse is the one that, in order to look at it, you have to protect your eyes and wear some special shades or glasses. So that was one thing that came to my mind, because I wonder if it opens up a way of thinking about how we look at the eclipse. And the second thing that came to my mind as well is it's your twofold question about what is being eclipsed to whom, I think it was. And for me, there was a third question that stemmed from the use of the word eclipse, or the verb to eclipse, in Crépon's take on Derrida, when he's analyzing in The Thought of Death and the Memory of War, is analyzing mourning and in relation as being equating with ethics for Derrida. And one of the questions that he asks is, what does politics forget or eclipse? And I was thinking, the question is, what is being eclipsed to whom, and by whom or by what, which I think ties in as well with your question about the sovereign potentially, and the political body, or the agency in the eclipse. So that was just to say that your questions were chiming with some of the things I had in mind when watching the film.
Thank you, Elodie. But also, I wanted to say, Irving, I don't know if you thought the same thing, but during the lockdown, I thought that basically the community was giving a sort of religious dimension to the event. So they were clapping. The clapping was sort of like it made me think about the I come from Lyon in France, and in Lyon on the 8th of December every year, everybody puts lights along their windows to thank the Virgin Mary for making the plague go away. That happened in the 17th century. Basically, plague came to Lyon, and people prayed, and the Virgin Mary apparently made the plague go away. And since then, every year, along windows on the 8th of December, people put lights. And I think that there was a kind of equivalent thing going on with what they called les soignants, doctors, nurses. They were regarded as the saviors, the people who were here for us. We had to stay out of the way, and they were the people here to protect us and to save us from this new plague. And I think that the light that is being eclipsed is also the light of also has a religious aspect to it. I don't know what you guys think.
I had something I wanted to add in there that might be relevant, if that's okay. So I took the image of light slightly differently, in the sense that I sort of associated it with the day and the everyday running course of things, where everyone in our community has their identities and positions, and are more or less externalized and objectified into the light of those positions and the presentation of those positions in the light. And that some might be more cast into shadow and marginalized, others might be able to stand in the light more fully because they have power. But it's a regime, to use Debordian's term, of spectacle, of presentation within the light, within which power seals itself in our society and distributes identities. So for me, the eclipse was the eclipse and suspension of that everyday rule of light and spectacle and power as an interruption of negativity into that. And for me, what was interesting about this, I agree, incredibly beautiful film, the invocation of the planetary system. Because a planetary system, if you like, is a community of scattered bodies, all of which at a distance are in relation to each other, illuminated by the sun. But that which ultimately holds them together, gravity and the pull of gravity, and articulates the whole system, is invisible and cannot be seen. And so it's not something that's cast to the light of spectacle, but it's something that beneath power binds all the scattered bodies into relation. So the figure of the eclipse is a suspension of that regime of light and identity and power, and an interruption of that, and a revealing of some invisible relationality, some hidden bond that brings us together outside of our identity positions. And outside any possibility of the idea that community is ultimately a logic of identity and positioned identity. That's how the film spoke to me, and why I suppose I saw the dance in the Antonioni film, where they're all mimicking the movement of the planets. Actually, such an incredibly, it's not a film I know, but I found it incredibly beautiful evocation of that idea of a planetary system as something that's guided by an invisible force, but lit up by something which sort of underpins that, but is not visible.
Yes, and if I'm not wrong, I think in astronomy they talk about the notion of a strange attractor between stars, where stars attract each other and yet they don't touch. And I suppose that relates back to the scene of the dancing that Ian, you were just mentioning, where what I noticed that there was very little contact between the dancers. I mean, there might be, but it's so imperceptible. And so for me, I mean, like something about community and touch has some kind of relation. If we go back to Nancy's idea of the being in common, so which is always closely related.
Sorry, if I could.
Hi, Damon.
Sorry, I think I'm having video problems, but yeah, just following on from what's been said, particularly Ian's point. I mean, I saw the Antonioni film years ago, so I don't fully remember the plot. Well, part of it is that it doesn't really have a plot from what I remember. But from what I recall, I think Antonioni himself regarded the eclipse also as a metaphor for alienation and the erasure of human relations, the impossibility of bonds between people. I think it's a triangular relationship, isn't it? It was Monica Vitti, Alain Delon, and somebody else. I can't quite remember, but it's a love triangle. But from what I recall, the film ends on a rather negative note, with no possibility of any kind of reconstitution of community or human relations. Whereas to me, the film we've just seen seems to suggest the possibility of the reconfiguration of community at the end, but in a new form, in light of of what's happened. So, I mean, I suppose I'm just wondering whether that there's a kind of difference between that kind of. I know the Antonioni only appears very briefly at the beginning, so it's not about Antonioni, but it seems to me that for him, the eclipse, from what I recall, was pretty much a negative metaphor. There was the eclipse and no reconstitution of community or identity thereafter, whereas here the film seems to suggest at the end a glimmer of hope and reconfiguration of community. I don't know if that spoke to others in the same way, but thanks.
Thank you, Damien. Yeah, I don't know if it gave if it had a glimmer of hope. Actually, I found it quite. It ends on a negative, isn't it? With the, I mean, I don't know.
Well, maybe hope is the wrong word. Maybe the possibility of a reconceptualization of community. Whereas I suppose the Antonioni might remember it's just, there's no there's no sense of human relations having in any way been changed or improved.
If I could just intervene there, that's fascinating, Damien. I was thinking partly of the background of Guy Debord that we were invited to think about, for whom spectacle and the space of the visible is a space of historical alienation of agency, and it seems there that the interruption of darkness, the negativity of darkness, as precisely an experience of a void, of an emptiness, is actually, certainly in Debord, I don't know about Antonioni, is positively valorized as almost like a revolutionary force, as a rupture, as an event of suspension. And then the question would be how you reconfigure community around that negativity, absence, that complete void of substance or essence, which really is just an interruptive force of the spectacle and the everyday. And to me, that leads to someone like Maurice Blanchot with a notion of the unavowable community, which is that we have in common is something that can't actually be named or viewed or held up in the presence, in the light of conceptual day, but it's somehow what binds us together is a very negative moment of absence. And to me, that's where the film takes me, and it's where if you like, the negative is positive, if you like.
Sure.
But I've probably read too much Blanchot, so.
I wonder if I could say something about what I thought was Fabienne's fantastic use of Debord, who I think is he's not read anywhere near as much as he should these days, and I myself haven't read him recently. But just to pick up on what Ian was saying about the famous book, The Society of the Spectacle, where the spectacle designates a kind of almost a continuation of how Marx saw capitalist production as incorporating all other forms of production. The spectacle almost incorporates all other possible modes of thinking, so that the moment we think we get outside of it, we've already been incorporated. And I think that's just a brilliant gesture on the part of Fabienne. I mean, I recently heard an interview with Bruno Latour about COVID-19 and what lessons we should learn and what not from COVID-19. And I think the title of the interview was, if we don't learn anything, if we take no lessons from COVID-19, it's a missed opportunity, something like this. Yeah? And so the question Latour asks, in I think a very Debordian way, is how to not have what our experiences of and our thoughts about the COVID-19 pandemic be incorporated into systems of meaning and systems of values that were already at play. How can we, to kind of echo what some people have been saying, turn this into an eclipse of meaning such that something new might come about, such that this could be an opportunity to think in a different way? I think in that sense, Fabienne's film is very Debordian. I don't know if Fabienne's still there. I wanted to ask her a little bit about the reasons for which she turned to, she's just left a comment, the reasons for which she turned to Debord, but that's really kind of what I'm reading in her gesture.
Okay, Fabienne has written something in the comments in English, which is very kind. Irving, can you read it for me, please?
No, I can't see it now. Where can I see it? Wait.
She says,
I have it, I can read it.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you all for your comments and thoughts. Maybe I can say why we have chosen these words, scattered, because the event provokes a rupture of belongings to a constituted community. It projects its individuals elsewhere. It is rarely a community as a whole that explodes. And the eclipsed, because individuals, whatever their belonging, who have experienced the same kind of relation to the event, create a community, which can be qualified, that those who do not return to the normal life, the habitual light, they eclipse themselves, they run away, or at least they refuse to go back. And this is where a possibility opens up, the ability to create something else, or endure but refuse, etc.
Thank you. Corey, does that? No,
yeah,
that,
I mean, it certainly does,
what
especially in what she's saying regarding the community that can't be qualified. I wonder if it might be, watching Fabienne's film, I was thinking about a community that couldn't be quantified and that could in fact be qualified in a way different from how we're used to qualifying them, I guess. Those were my thoughts. This helps a great deal.
Well, if I say something here too, I mean, like Fabienne's comments also kind of like bring me back to what Ian was talking about. When he referred to Blanchot, the inavouable or the unavowable, and if I remember correctly, Nancy reads this unavowable as something that cannot be decided, which is a kind of it can't be decided whether it is the end, whether it is the end of all possible reunion, or or is it like reunion achieved? And so there's a kind of undecidability between whether there is community or not. And I suppose this is, I mean, in Fabienne's film, or the idea Eclipse would suggest that kind of suspension, and where we do not exactly know how to, perhaps how to think about or to articulate this community that is in eclipse, in the dark, in the shadows, scattered. There's no some kind of absolute knowledge where in a kind of Hegelian fashion where you can gather all together to create this whole, into some kind of project that Nancy has always critiqued, this idea of a kind of project that is in totality, in fusion, and things like that.
Can I just add something in response to what Fabienne has just written in the chat, where she says a kind of us takes shape, and for me, just responding also to what Irving and others have said, the question is, what is the we and what is the us of community after COVID-19? And at the beginning of the pandemic, I, as one does, opened up Camus' La Peste, the plague, and particularly there's an opening of the second section, I think, where he says, the plague was of concern to us all, and also adds, we were all in the same boat. Now, of course, these are open to a lot of problematic issues. When Camus says about Algerian Oran, we're all in the same boat, we can assume he was talking about the white French colon, and he doesn't really talk much about the Arabic community. And at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion about whether we were all in the same boat, because clearly we weren't. COVID-19 has affected people according to class and age, but also, as we know, it's issued the marginalization and economic oppression of BAME people who've been disproportionately affected. So what COVID-19 showed us is that there's a sense of the we, that we're not all in the same boat. But actually, to me, what's that shown is that it's put into question the we, and thrown up all these issues of inequality and marginalization against the background of a different kind of we that isn't part of how we're economically and ethnically or in any other identitarian way distributed across society. So actually, as in La Peste, so today what is put in question by the plague is the identity or non-identity of this we. And it seems to me, to echo what Irving said, is that actually this we will have to remain equivocal. It tells us that there is a bond that transcends our socioeconomic distribution and social and other identities. But it's also something that's obscure, that subtends that nevertheless puts us in community, but we can't quite locate. And yet we've started talking about we and talking about inequality in a way we weren't doing previously. So for me, that's how it resonated. We end up with a we, but it's kind of a biological we, or a we of finitude. It says that we share a physical environment, and ultimately I would wonder whether that we is not just the humans sharing biophysical space and spreading the contagion, but also those animal communities from whom and from where the contagion came. So the question of the we is ultimately, to me, what the film poses, and I was pleased to see Fabienne say that, but I'm not sure there's an answer.
Yeah, oh, I don't know, my share video, yeah, it's working now. Yes, I thought, yeah, that's very interesting. I was going to say fantastic development, Ian, but I didn't get the chance to write it down. I was wondering also about another type of reconfiguration, in a sense, of various communities that was being imposed on us by the system, which was the idea that there were amongst us essential people and non-essentials. There were the essentials and the non-essentials, and in a sense, the essentials were spanning socio-economical, say, you know, straddling quite a wide socio-economical arc. So coming back to what you were saying, Ian, there's also this reconfiguration where, at least in France, they were talking a lot about the people who worked in supermarkets, how essential they were, and people who were delivering stuff, and how unrecognized they had been up till now, and how they were just as heroic as doctors. And so, you know, there was this whole reconfiguration going on, which struck me, especially as a non-essential. I felt a bit, you know, hurt. But joking apart, I don't know if any of you thought the same.
I could maybe pick up on that just by saying that oh, it seems people are asking questions too in the comments. This is great. Or just adding comments. When I was listening to what Ian was saying, I was thinking about the expansion of this we and expanding it beyond the human as well. I mean, I say this because some of the most interesting stuff I've been either reading or listening to, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos during the pandemic, and it deals with how, I mean, there was a very interesting article in the New York Times about a month ago by a South African philosopher, David Benatar, about whom I know nothing. But the title of his article was "Our Cruel Treatment of Animals Led to the Coronavirus." And in fact, just today, there have been a few reports about how just today in The Guardian, there was a story called "Pandemics Result from Destruction of Nature," say UN and WHO. And the idea that somehow the entire biosphere is just there for us to have in front of us and do what we want to with. I think that's something that hopefully the more and more indisputable fact that the destruction of the biosphere and mistreatment of animals has led directly to the pandemic. Hopefully that's a discussion we can begin to have as a result of the pandemic, even though it's sad that it took that to have it happen.
I think there was I'm coming back to this idea that there's a sort of religious element that is being projected. The idea that we have sinned, therefore we shall suffer, therefore we will be saved. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but from the start there has been the idea that it's because of ecological disasters going on that this virus has emerged. I don't know. We're made to feel guilty about the emergence of this virus.
Well, what you say, Natalie, reminds me of there was a similar discourse from the religious right in the 80s in the light of the AIDS crisis. You know, this sense of this is a punishment for promiscuity, etc., etc. I mean, that's a watered down argument of what you're saying, but the idea, the need by some to place this into some kind of moral framework of punishment and reward, or rather punishment. But yeah, I mean, I think Corey's point is all about ecology. I think that's a very good point, because I think part of the argument is that the gap between mankind and nature has narrowed because we're basically destroying it. So, you know, the prospect of kind of interspecies crossover of an undesirable nature has increased. So in a way, it is tied into the ecological crisis that pre-existed the pandemic. I mean, they're intermeshed in some way, arguably.
Okay.
I'll just
I prepared this to support my point. No, cancel share files. This picture here. Can you see it? Saint Michael
yes.
by Raphael.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought it was sort of reminiscent of like the kind of savior, the heroes. There was a lot of talk about the heroes that we were clapping, and the NHS in Britain was heroic, and kids were made to draw rainbows and say thank you to our NHS heroes, and you know. So anyway.
Can I ask a question? Tara Needham raised something interesting in the comments. I wonder if anyone has any thoughts about that.
Tara, what did she say? I'm just checking.
How do we understand the emergence of BLM globally after the pandemic?
How did the pandemic allow for a focused consciousness and enable physical acts of resistance in the midst of sustained physical absence? Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Any ideas? Maybe Tara, would you like to come in and tell us what you think about this?
Hi. Thanks for letting me ask my question. I'm a friend and colleague of Corey's. I'm in Ankara. Yeah, I really loved the film, and it really clicked for me after that moment of really when the lines came together, like we are the scattered community after the eclipse, that, you know, we were a community under the eclipse. We were held together or bound in some way, and that now we are scattered, and that there's a kind of a loss of that connection is part of what I noticed. And it's kind of the someone else called the catastropheization of the kind of pleasures of catastrophe that can happen, or of the change. But on the flip side of this, I'm just really sitting with this contradiction of the physicality of Black Lives Matter. I mean, the last thing I expected was for people to physically gather immediately after the pandemic, and I'm just trying to think about what seems to be a kind of one-to-one contradictory response. And we're mentioning the idea of what community came. Well, here it is. This is the community that emerged. So I'm curious if anyone is thinking that directly about, I've heard some people say that the pandemic allowed for a type of focus or concentration that we would not have had if we were going about our daily lives, and it allowed for this movement from enclosure to then like public space. So I'm just curious if other people have been thinking along that line. And I'm wearing a mask because we have a plumber in the house.
Could I just respond to that then, building on what Natalie was saying, which was really interesting? And it seems to me that the dimension of the sacred does come in here in relation to community, and that Natalie's sort of evoked that really well. And what I often sometimes see, and again this probably comes from reading Bataille rather than anyone else, is the idea of a communal gathering around the sacred involving a distancing from everyday life and the order of everyday life, and a suspension of everyday life, but also gathering around some kind of invisible presence, something that's not tangible or visible, and then sublating that invisibility into something material in the context of that suspension of everyday life. And this might be sublating it into the figure of Christ and the replaying the sacrifice of Christ so that all our sins are redeemed, or it might be sublating that sort of invisible thing that's gathering us all together into figures of the NHS and banging in their name. But what you have from that gathering around of something that's invisible is and again this goes back to the sort of the Hegelian hinterland of Debordian and people like Bataille, is a sublation and a gathering of community round a new image, in the suspension of what we thought we were, in that negative moment that's interrupted it, and an exposure to some kind of invisible absence. We then find something else to gather around. And it seems to me that in the pandemic, race came to the fore in so many ways and called into question our existing sense of community in so many ways. And going back to where Natalie began about people who've been cast sort of into the margins and the shadow, to reform an image of our community in the light of that, it makes absolutely sense that there should be a gathering around this new image of what we always were, but we didn't yet know it, or it was being repressed or suppressed. So to me, the sacred dimension that Natalie brings in is very helpful to sort of explain these interruptions, but also reconfigurations.
Thank you. I think.
Yeah, I don't know, Ian. Would you think that this is a different spectacle from Debord's, the critique of the spectacle? I mean, it's like like what Tara has mentioned, this whole BLM movement global, and would you think that this is a different way of taking over the spectacle, which is different from what the existing the existing dominant ideology is. So all these communities, would be those that have been shattered even, prior to the pandemic, something that has been eclipsed, and perhaps this is the time where we are picking up the pieces, and hence the kind of BLM that's going on, not just in America, but also in France. And I mentioned Saint-Denis, previously, where people are, the justice for Adama, and things like that. And so it's taking over the spectacle because previously that shouldn't be the spectacle. the spectacle should be, what has been known as normal life. And that was my slight critique of that, of that image of people applauding the medical services. It's always the image of people in nice apartments with balconies that, who can stand out in the balconies and applaud the people. And I was just wondering, what about, the poor districts, in Saint-Denis? We don't see those image. That's not the spectacle.
Can I just respond to that very quickly before shutting up? I think that's exactly right, Irving. And my sense is, I'm not greatly knowledgeable of Debord, but he was very conscious, I think, that the challenge to the spectacle, that moment of negativity and interruption, itself become a spectacle. It should not become recongealed as a modus of alienating historical agency once more. And when the community reforms, the question is, will it reform simply as another mode of spectacle and the distribution of power, which tries to reconfirm the hierarchies, the distributions of the community that was interrupted? And I think we saw that in exactly the way you describe. Is it possible to reconfigure the community in the absence of its recongealing into spectacle, to keep that moment of negativity alive, and to keep that disalienation of historical agency, that the eclipse and the suspension and the negative moment would imply? So you're absolutely spot on.
Yeah, just building on what the last few people have said, I think one interesting thing for me about what Tara brought up, Black Lives Matter, and the whole kind of rage against a lot of the violence that's occurring right now in this country and elsewhere, is what I'm seeing is a real consciousness on the part of people in that movement not to somehow, to at least attempt not to be reincorporated in something like a spectacle. Something interesting happened yesterday. There was a meeting. President Trump met for an hour with families of people whose with people whose family members had lost their lives as a result of police violence, and afterwards wanted a photo app, and several of them refused, saying, it's great that you met us at the White House and so forth, but if this is just to be part of your sort of propaganda machine, no thanks. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yes, thank you, Corey. I would just realize that Fabienne has written something about returning to what Ian was saying. Debordian, whose pseudonym is Lutz Bassman, allows us to show explorations into the unknown, in the dark, to show the idea of vacillation in a space where nothing really has a form, where the known forms have become uncertain. So thanks for this, Fabienne. Okay.
I was wondering if I could come in here, Natalie, just
Sure.
based on what a few people have been saying. I mean, I wonder whether at some level also the link between the pandemic and BLM it's led to an interrogation of what are the limits, the moral limits of state power, in the sense that on the one hand the state has been necessary and even perhaps arguably welcomed in terms of the lockdown, although of course one could argue that in Hungary people like Viktor Orban have gone too far and so forth, and the whole question of the apps, is it right that the state could the state exert control in that kind of Foucauldian way via the apps beyond the medical necessity of controlling the pandemic and so forth? But BLM in a way seems to have flagged up a clash with the state power, whereas only a matter of weeks earlier the state was being, I would say, broadly welcomed for its interventions, not necessarily in terms of its policy mistakes, but there was maybe a collective feeling that state action was necessary and the state had to play its role, and the degree of intervention was necessary. Whereas BLM seems to have almost flipped that on its head, because then the state is left, you know, if we think of this country, Boris Johnson, you know, how does the government respond to the pulling down of the statue in Bristol, for example? So I mean, sorry to try and make this sound a bit more coherent, but I think there's a question of the full moral spectrum of what the state should be doing has been kind of explored over the last few weeks. And BLM seems to have pushed it in the direction of, well, you know, the state is, which was largely welcomed a few weeks ago, is now kind of going too far, arguably.
Thank you, Damien. I was wondering now, we've got 15 minutes left, if anybody would like to ask questions or add comments. Be great if you wanted to join in, but you don't have to. But let's wait for a few seconds to see if anybody wants to join in. No, doesn't look like it, but if you change your mind, just go ahead. All right, what else can we add? Fabienne says, I agree with Damien. Echo 3, which is in progress, is entitled The Impossible Event. It talks about how the event, as a shift to something else, has become impossible in the current situation. Lockdown and post-lockdown rules, biopolitics, etc. Ah, okay, well, we'll have to watch that one when it's finished. Okay. So, Corey, were you? I think your microphone is off. No, it's not.
I brilliantly said, ah. I didn't understand. I was trying to figure out the reference, and Echo this is the next Echo, right? This is the film that's in preparation.
This is the third film in the series, as I understand it. The second one is about
ennui. C'est sur l'ennui.
Oh yeah, boredom. Okay, so Ian says, maybe I could add, just for information, a few words about the genealogy of the film. During the lockdown, the idea for this film, or more exactly this assemblage, came to us pretty spontaneously. Us, me and my friend Alexandre, i.e. Eniko Fekete. We were reading analysis of the event that was happening, but they weren't really convincing us. The first analysis that spoke to us has been Corey's video. We had already worked on the question of the event as part of a program I had coordinated during a few years on radical events and life reconfigurations. The aim was precisely to reflect on the links between event and community. It was in the core of my research in India concerning the lepers, the creation of a community following the event of disease and exclusion. For several years now, we have also been running a seminar where we explore new forms of writing anthropology, combining text, sound, image, and video. While looking for forms of writing, perhaps for us, the anthropologist's task is not only to echo what people say or show, but also to say something else, or in another way, from what they say or show. An intention close to this method can be found in the situationists want to expand. I quote them, the most general goal must be to expand the part of life. That's the intention of our assemblage, to consider a situation and try to take it somewhere else. So our assemblage has no artistic pretension, but is a proposition of anthropological writing that uses with aesthetics works.
Huh.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very enlightening. And it all started with Corey's video. That's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. These are, I should say, these videos are. Irving made one as well. It's part of there's a French philosopher, Jérôme Lèbre, and he has a YouTube channel which was called Philosophizing in the Time of Epidemic, and now has been changed to Philosophizing
Au présent.
in the Present, or just Philosophizing the Present. I'm not sure which, but there are probably, what, 70 videos, something like that by this time. So there are some really interesting ones, obviously. I think there are 4 now by Nancy.
Okay, so to wrap up, are there things that we can add to what we've said? Yes, I wanted to just say where Fabienne says that the film has no aesthetic pretension, artistic pretension. Well, I think it's very artistic, actually. So you did well.
Perhaps I could ask Fabienne something?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just the dance scene in the film I think is it not from Bellatar? And if so, I'm just wondering, she refers to that as the most beautiful scene in the history of cinema. I'm just wondering what specifically drew her to that. I guess it's maybe not the best question because she sort of answers it in the film, but I was curious.
The first scene? I think the dance scene, the one with the winos dancing, is that the one? Yeah. Yes, it is from Bellatar. Werksmeister's Harmonies. Okay. At this stage, I'm just wondering whether we might end. It seems like a shame, but that was fascinating. Thank you so much to all of you for taking part. It went really, really well, and I'm very pleased. So okay, let's say goodbye then, and let's do this again soon. All right, goodbye.
Bye.
And thank you.
Thanks, Natalie, for organizing.
You're welcome.